Right out of college, I went to work for a car dealership. We sold new cars. They were cars that were new to the United States as well. This was about 35 years ago. They were rock bottom price-wise. The dealership I worked for ran an ad in the Sunday paper saying that they could sell one of these cars for just an unbelievably low price. It was a stripped down model, didn't have anything. No air conditioning, no power windows, no nothing. The problem was they didn't have that car on the lot. So people would come in thinking they were going to get this car, and we were told to upsell them. That just wasn't right. Didn't set right with me. I lasted about a month there and I quit. Well, you know, a lot of lawyers tell their clients when their clients come in to see them that they can give them the moon. And that's just not true. I've learned through the years of practicing that you got to be honest as an attorney with your client and let your client know what they can and cannot get. If you're being told by a prospective attorney that he can give you more or you can get more than you think you can, you might ought to look somewhere else. Bob and Jennifer had been dating for about 2 months. Bob was crazy about Jennifer, but she didn't feel the same about Bob. She decided she would start seeing some other people, and she did. She met this one guy named Steve, and they went out a couple of times, but Steve just wasn't right for her. Wasn't the kind of guy that she would want to get married to, and certainly wasn't the type of guy that she would want raising her children. Unfortunately, she got pregnant, and Steve was the father. She didn't tell Steve. She told Bob. She told Bob that she'd gotten pregnant by somebody else, but Bob loved her. Bob wanted to stay together with her. They ended up getting married. She ended up having the baby. He ended up signing what's called a voluntary acknowledgement of paternity, the birth certificate, stating that he was the father. She also signed it, stating that he was the father. Unfortunately, he wasn't. Stay tuned for part 2 to see what happens. So Jennifer had gotten pregnant by Steve, didn't tell Steve, told Bob, so Bob and Jennifer got married, and neither one of them told Steve, but they both knew the truth. And they went ahead and Bob signed the birth certificate. Well, Steve found out. He found out about 3 years later. Child started looking a lot like Steve. Some of Steve's friends and some of Jennifer's friends that they had in common told Steve about it. So he inquired and sure enough found out that that was his biological child. So he hired an attorney and filed a petition to disestablish paternity in Bob and to establish paternity in himself. The court heard all the proof and ruled that Bob and Jennifer committed fraud by signing the birth certificate and not letting Steve know that he was the biological father. The court disestablished paternity in Bob and established paternity in Steve. Do you think that was the right result? Do you think the judge could have done something different? What do you think Bob and Jennifer ought to do at this point? As a parent, you have an absolute right to raise your child the way you want to raise your child. You have a right to decide who they are going to associate with or if they're going to associate with anyone. You have a right to decide where they're going to go to school and how they're going to be educated. You have a right to decide where they go to church or even if they go to church at all. These are called superior parental rights in the law, and it's tough for you to lose those rights, but they can be lost. A superior parental right can be taken away if it can be shown that you pose a substantial risk of harm to your child. Well, what are some things that would cause that to happen? Well, exposing your child to your drug use and your neglect can cause you to lose your superior parental rights. Failing to educate your child, failing to give your child necessary medical care and medical treatment can cause you to lose those superior rights. But it's difficult, and it takes a showing that you pose a substantial risk of harm to your child before those rights will be lost. As an attorney, I'm often called upon to give advice in family law situations because that's the type of law that I practice. It's funny, but a lot of times people won't take my advice. They usually end up in trouble when they don't. If you're going to ask an attorney for advice, you should at least take the advice that they give you. Otherwise, you might get in trouble. Perfect example occurred a couple of months ago. I had a mother call me up. She's a mother of a 5-year-old little girl. She was divorced. It was Dad's weekend to have the little girl. Dad called up about 30 minutes ahead of time, said, I'm coming to get our daughter. Mom told the little girl and she started screaming and crying. Mom called me up. What should I do? Well, you should follow the court order. If you don't, you might get in trouble. You might get arrested. You might lose custody of your daughter. You might be in contempt of court. Well, Mom didn't take my advice for whatever reason, and she ended up with a warrant for her arrest. In that situation, she was charged with interfering with Dad's parenting time. You know, if you're going to call an attorney up and ask for advice, you ought to take the advice.